So you were taught that Abe Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address while taking a train from Washington to Gettysburg 2 days before the consecration ceremony. Legend has it that he scribbled some notes at the very last moment on the back of an envelope, waiting for inspiration to get the better of him. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not entirely accurate. Believe it or not, he'd been thinking of that speech for over 4 months. Most people don't know that. Here's the real story. So Lincoln at Gettysburg, look, it's one of the greatest speeches in American history. It was only 272 words, lasted about 3 minutes, but arguably the most consequential 272 words and 3 minutes in American history. I mean that. Now, did you know that Lincoln wasn't even the primary speaker that day? Former Secretary of State Edward Everett was actually the main event, which seems laughable today. Lincoln was practically an afterthought, a brief exclamation point following Everett's 2-hour oration. Of course, nobody remembers what Everett actually said, while Lincoln's brief remarks changed the arc of American history, and I'm going to convince you it did. But there's an interesting backstory that's rarely discussed regarding Lincoln at Gettysburg, which is the whole point of this video, so you got to hang with me through the end. It's not well known, but it's critical to understanding how Lincoln the president evolved over time. Look, to appreciate this backstory, we need to understand what makes the speech itself so memorable, even revered. Why does it rank among the most consequential orations and documents in American history? You know, prior to the war and even during it, Lincoln struggled, and I mean he really struggled, with the idea of freedom, equality, union, and disunion as it related to the issue of slavery. You have to remember that throughout his political career, Lincoln was conspicuously not an abolitionist. To be clear, he abhorred slavery. He thought it was cruel and inhumane. But he was also a political realist. As a politician and then president, his overriding concern was preserving the Union. He was a unionist, as he said, more than anything else. The war between the states was about union or disunion to Lincoln, and in his eyes, nothing more. In fact, in 1862, he famously told publisher Horace Greeley, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or destroy liberty. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it." For Lincoln, it was all about holding the country together and nothing more. That's why he took such a narrow approach with the Emancipation Proclamation in early 1863. It was a tersely worded legal document that merely freed the slaves in the southern states and actually exempted the border states for fear of alienating them. Look, it was a wartime exigency, another tactic to be used against the Confederate States more than anything else. There was no soaring rhetoric, no deep philosophical meaning behind it. It was just a terse legal document. Lincoln hoped that the proclamation would inspire the North, sow chaos in the South, and change the trajectory of the war. Remember that in the fall and winter of 1862 and early 1863, it was not going well for the North. But the proclamation did none of that. It came and it went and was mostly met with indifference. It bothered Lincoln that the Emancipation Proclamation had little impact on the war and even less impact on the public's imagination. Abolitionists considered it meaningless, and the radical Republicans in Congress saw it as just another sign of Lincoln's weakness, believe it or not. And it bothered Lincoln even more that the 5 words he cherished most from the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, rang hollow and hypocritical. It really bothered him throughout his life. In fact, he struggled to reconcile the obvious contradictions with slavery. Equality was a goal to strive for, he was fond of saying, placed in the Declaration for future use, but not necessarily an immediate guarantee. That's pretty amazing. That's how Lincoln thought about it. As the likelihood of war drew nearer, he further sublimated this intellectual struggle for political expediency. As president, he put it on the back burner so that he could hold his tenuous coalition together around the simple and agreeable themes of union over disunion. That's what the war was about, he told himself over and over, and not about equality. He was convinced that if he made it about equality, the border states would turn Confederate and his fragile coalition in the North would collapse, which he was probably right about. He believed this to be the case so much that he practically purged the word equality from his vocabulary during his presidency. He almost never uttered the word for fear it would be used against him to sow discontent. We knew this was about treating the slaves as our equals. He could practically hear his critics bellow. Whether Abe Lincoln was politically astute, or simply naive, or even cowardly, it really depends on your point of view. But that's what the man believed in the spring and early summer of 1863. Look it up. But the Battle of Gettysburg changed all that. To be sure, there had been bloody and emotionally draining battles before, but there was something about Gettysburg that just stirred him, and of course many others. It could have been that it was fought deep in Northern territory. Could have been because it was the breakthrough the South really needed. It was replete with heroics and heroism, we know that. And the cost of human lives at Gettysburg is simply staggering. You know, it hit Lincoln like a ton of bricks immediately following the Union's wins at Vicksburg and Gettysburg in the summer of 1863. Now here's the part of the story that often gets overlooked. In fact, the whole point of this video. On the evening of July 7th, as news of the two victories began to spread at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, a throng of Union revelers began converging outside the White House, hoping to elicit some impromptu remarks from Lincoln about the Union's newfound momentum. You know, back then it wasn't uncommon for these types of gatherings outside the White House. We know that doesn't really happen today. Lincoln, moved by the sight of the crowd, delivered some unplanned remarks to the celebratory onlookers. At that moment, for whatever reason, he decided it was time to make the war about more than just Union or disunion. How long ago is it, Lincoln addressed the serenaders, 80-odd years? Since on the 4th of July, for the first time in the history of the world, by a nation, by its representatives, assembled and declared a self-evident truth that all men are created equal. We have a gigantic rebellion, he continued, at the bottom of which is an effort to overthrow the principle that all men are created equal. On the 4th, the cohorts of those who opposed the declaration that all men are created equal turned tail and ran. Gentlemen, he concluded, this is a glorious theme and the occasion for a speech, but I am not prepared to make one worthy of the occasion. I would like to speak in terms of praise due to the many brave officers and soldiers who have fought in the cause of this war. Those are pretty amazing remarks by Lincoln. As you could see, they echo the themes, even some of the stylings, of the Gettysburg Address 4 months later. It's just remarkable to see the similarities. Of course, Lincoln's utterances went little noticed that day. In today's political parlance, we would say he was floating a trial balloon. But it was unmistakable. There's Abraham Lincoln for the first time making the war about something more than just preserving the Union. With a few simple sentences, he had begun to recast it as a struggle for universal freedom, equality, and curing the ails of the Declaration of Independence. He came to this conclusion 4 months before delivering his remarks at Gettysburg. Most people don't know that. Look, he probably scribbled some notes on that train, and yes, he certainly refined it the morning of the speech. But the sentiment, that had been stirring inside him for months. And over the course of 3 minutes at Gettysburg, it would be immortalized forever. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor, hit like and of course subscribe if you haven't already. Till next time, I'm Nick Ragone.